Hello, Briat.
Ryan, Haribo.
So, today's, what we constantly want to be doing is taking a spiritual view because we have this time to spend with ourselves and spend with our loved ones. And taking this time if somebody wants to, adopt or deepen their spiritual practice or understanding. And so, in that vein, what are your thoughts about today? What is it that what's on your mind today
Oh,
in regards to?
in light of the conversations we had in the previous podcasts, I think what comes up for me is to after you've dealt with your fears or you've made the choice now to step inward, then one important thing and very useful thing to realize is that you have everything within yourself for satisfaction, and that satisfaction is not found without. And now is a particularly potent time to investigate that because all of these things that we have relied on have been taken away from us, so to speak. We don't have all those things. I mean, you might still have your couch, you might have your phone, you might have your TV, but there's a lot of things that you don't have. And a lot of things like, I'm a surfer, so you can't go and surf now. So then there's a little bit of I don't know, you might even feel an identity crisis. But the point is that in a very fast-paced society, we usually don't have time to think about these things. We usually don't have time to consider that actually whatever I'm doing now will never satisfy me. Satisfaction will have to be found elsewhere. And what is that place where I'll find satisfaction? So now being in isolation, it's a nice time to think about that and to reflect on it.
Okay, and now that you're in isolation and that you're going to uh, reflect on satisfaction, is there anything else? Any other words? Is it satisfaction or?
Yeah, satisfaction. Um, well, in the Vedic literatures, the soul is described as Ananda Moy Vyasat, which means that the soul by nature is pleasure seeking. We're driven by pleasure. And when something is not satisfying us as much as we want it and it's not living up to our expectations, then we kick it and we try and find something better. And this is the theme of every living soul in this material world, basically. But when one connects to a spiritual source, then one derives a constant and constantly increasing satisfaction, which then basically you're hooked on it. So in this
Okay,
consumerist
so
society, maybe I'll start with that then. In the consumerist society, then we are driven to pursue what they call in Vedic literatures sense objects. It's just things which come into contact with your senses. They come into contact with your eyes, your ears, your nose, your tongue, your genitals, your skin. And then we're told that these things will basically will derive the happiness that we want from them. And then there's also different degrees to which one can engage in these things. And then naturally we try to progress through the different degrees of enjoying our senses in different ways. Because as soon as you start in one sense, after some time, then it's not enough and you need something more. You need more of it or you need something better and more potent. And then this is the basis of addiction also.
so I have a question.
Yeah.
I think you might have already alluded to it, but um, so in not being a body, and that the we've been we spend our time serving the senses. We spend our time, trying to feel good about who we are and what's going on by serving the senses.
Yeah.
Would you agree to that?
Yes, yes.
And it's paramount. I mean, it's like, and you're serving the senses. You are constantly running around, depending on how uncomfortable your life is, trying to trade a balance for yourself, and maybe on the side of satisfaction and feeling good about who I am in my world is by serving my senses, by creating situations where I'm eating or And there can be an imbalance that gets created there. There's very easily an imbalance gets created there. The less connected you are to anything else that's giving you satisfaction, there's an imbalance that's very easy to discover. So my question is, it might be a little bit premature, but I've only, let's see, is what's a balance? So in spite of the fact that you have a spiritual practice and that you are, you meditate, connected to all that is, and are devotional to creation, you know, you take the place, of a lofty place of serving. How do you enjoy your senses? Because I'm pretty sure you enjoy the food you eat, and I'm pretty sure you enjoy the touch that you get,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty sure that you enjoy the intimacy that you have.
Mm.
How in face of all of this, where is a balance struck
Okay.
for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something I've thought about a lot myself, especially since I was a monk for 7 years, completely celibate, and I lived in a monastery. And then when I got married, then this was something on my mind a lot also. That because the
I'm sure it came up.
yeah, because the nature, you know, of being married is that some enjoyment will be there. So
Yes.
where I found myself in a very comfortable space that I have been going with is that um, that there's nothing wrong with sense gratification per se. The problem is attachment to sense gratification and the
Yes.
idea that it will make you happy. That's the problem. But sense gratification itself is actually not a problem. In fact, sense
Could you
gratification.
start? Could you start with food? We'll get to people, but food, like you have very special food,
Yes, yes,
and it has a very enjoyable feeling in eating it. You can feel like the first mouthful of how that feels.
yes,
So just in being able to, like, where's a healthy balance? Like, where do you drink deeply of the deliciousness of your sensory perception of your
yeah.
food, and then and that how deeply do you allow yourself to feel it, which I can only assume is wholly,
Mm.
completely, and then what is it that you're looking for to make sure that it doesn't get out of balance?
Well,
And then we'll get to the tricky stuff.
yes. So in the Western world, the focus is very much on pleasure, whereas in ancient cultures, and particularly Vedic cultures, is more my area of expertise. But from what I can tell from other cultures, it's a very similar idea. Is that the focus is more on dharma than it is on pleasure, especially for the higher classes of society. That the kings and the intellectuals and the sages, that dharma is more of importance than pleasure. And the understanding is that dharma, or following one's one could say intrinsic nature, but intrinsic nature also has responsibilities that you have to abide by and that you have to fulfill as a natural consequence of life. Sense gratification, or so-called happiness, it will come of its own accord. You don't have to look for it. And the example is given that just like suffering comes to somebody without looking for it, similarly, happiness also comes without you having to look for it. So you don't look for it, it will come. It's going to come on its own, just like suffering. You just need to do what you got to do your dharma, and it will come. And let's say now with eating, it's a nice example.
So what do you mean?
So,
So define do your dharma, because that's not, you know,
okay, that's a very
regular
broad
language.
topic. So I would say that you could say occupational duty is a good translation I found, or intrinsic nature, is that every single thing in this creation, even spiritual or material, it has an intrinsic nature. Like the dharma of sugar is to be sweet. So that's
Yes.
it's its nature. So, and then if you look
Yes.
at, let's say now as a human being, I have different choices I can make. And depending on my choices, then there are certain dharmas attached to that. For example, I was a monk, so I have a certain dharma. My dharma is to be very, very strict in my spiritual practice, very clean in my conduct and personal behavior, an example, and to be an
Yes.
inspiration and a servant to the community. And then also to
Yes.
study the scriptures and the Vedic literatures, and then also to go out and make it available for other people. So this is my dharma.
Okay.
So now I'd
Okay.
married, my dharma has changed. Now I have the dharma of a husband, because I'm playing the role of a husband now. And then
Yes.
dharmas and responsibilities.
Yeah, I have a slightly different interpretation of dharma. So yes, it's the nature of things, but it's also the nature of, if perceived correctly, is a gift, is to be able to see the miracle in it, to be able to see the gift in it, to be able to see the perfection in it.
Yeah,
Um, and that so that's why I was asking. So yes, it's also the nature of it. You know, there's a design of what drives me or what I'm thrown to do. In your case, be a monk, and
mm,
in my case, be a transformational guy.
mm,
Um, so here's, I have a simple question. Is like, and it's a personal question. So when you are, you know, I assume you love the food that you eat,
yeah. I had a really good lunch
and
today.
you, yeah. So, and then like, do you ever, you know, you eat, you know, I'm sure at certain times, and like there's some discipline in what you do.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a place where you were like, you know, there's an attachment or a craving, or, you know, you start heading to the fridge like everybody else on the planet, and that there's a interest or a temptation to go seeking food, and not necessarily because you're hungry. You know, it's, you know, maybe it's boredom, maybe it's placating something,
Yeah.
maybe it's really placating something. What is your experience with that?
My experience is that it happens all the time. The senses are
Yeah,
quite ravenous. So,
demanding, yes.
so in my personal practice, I don't eat any food which has not been prepared ceremonially. So in my practice of Hare Krishna practice, that I prepare food which I don't taste while preparing it, and my meditation is that I'm going to offer it to Krishna, and then after that whole process has been complete, then I'll accept the remnants of that sacrifice, of that ceremony, and then that
Yes.
food has a completely different quality than it originally had. And you can do the test where you make a recipe twice, and the one you follow this procedure, and the other one you follow a procedure where people normally would they taste it while they're cooking it. But the idea is that
Okay.
it's not only nourishing for my body and enlivening to my senses, but it's also very satisfying to my mind. So then
Yeah.
now if I'm feeling that I just want to eat, not because of wanting to out of hunger, but because of satisfying my tongue, like the belly and the
Yes.
tongue, they're two different things. So then that's also
Yes.
okay because it's a sensual demand, and I can satisfy it by taking prasad, which is what this sanctified food is called prasad. So, but obviously, one's intelligence should be used so that you can maintain good health also. Like if I'm going to eat a lot of sugar, I'm going to be suffering because of that. Whereas like before, I was
Okay.
actually able to eat a lot of sugar without effect. But now, I'm in my 30s, so I'm not so powerful anymore. But the point is, I can regulate it by taking prasadam, and that's a good regulation. That means I'm not just eating anything and everything that
And
my
what is
body desires.
prasad?
Prasadam is food that's been offered in ceremony first.
Yes.
Yeah.
So even, is there no leftovers, you know, from ceremonial food?
Sorry?
There's leftovers from ceremonial food, yes?
Yes, yes.
And it's in the fridge, right?
Yeah, it's in the fridge. If there's
So,
leftovers.
right.
Yeah.
So if there is, you know, what is, I'm just looking at, I'm trying to put this into every person's experience,
Mm.
is that we eat, there's food in the fridge, and that you were talking about there not being an addiction, as opposed to the higher level understanding. I want to know in the moment when you've, you know, when your tongue is saying, hey, you know, I would really like to go to the fridge right now, is that, what is your relationship with that? What conversation do you have with yourself? How do you interpret it?
Um, well, maybe
And what is,
the desire can have a varying level of strength. And then depending
yes,
on how much it nags me, I might act differently. But if I'm busy or sometimes a thought comes, but it just passes, I tolerate it a bit. But sometimes I really feel like I could really do with a sweet right now or with a bit of a snack, then I go and do it.
okay,
Yeah.
all right. That's kind of what I'm asking, is that what's your relationship? So how do you know where there's a balance? When do
Or
you know?
I think for me, the balance is that I'm not eating something that's not been ceremoniously prepared. So I might walk into the kitchen and then there's a packet of dates there. But then I'm thinking, but
Yes,
this is not being used in ceremony yet. So I can't touch it. I'm not even going to think about eating it. There's no question about it in my mind. And then either I leave it. I just like, okay, I'm not going to go through the effort, or I prepare an offering and I offer it on my altar, and then I accept the remnants of that offering, and then I have the
Okay.
dates. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I get the general idea of, I was just looking to see that other people can relate to in
Yeah.
regards to keeping a balance with, in this case, food. Okay, so we're with that we're serving our senses,
Yes.
and then you wanted to talk about that we're not our senses, and that in connecting to something greater than that. So I'll take you back to what you were saying.
Yeah. That's and then whatever we said now, I think was a nice embellishing point to that. Um, is that the senses, they have the demands, and it's not really possible for us in this age to just stop them, which in previous ages, by the practice of Ashtanga yoga, this is what you ultimately did, where especially when it comes to from the pranayama stage, and then your pratyahara and
Yes.
your dharana, for those who don't know, basically means when you're controlling your breath, you've already now sitting in your postures, and by breath control, you are reducing the activity of the mind, and then by pratyahara, you're actually withdrawing the senses from their sense objects,
Yes.
which sounds a
Yes.
bit of a far-out idea, but basically what it means is that the energy that's going out into your senses, which connect to the external world, you cut it off and you withdraw it internally, and you stop your sensory activity altogether. So for
Yes.
us,
On
that
the outside, but what is happening is that you have an inner focus, and there is as much of a full experience if you are connected to your senses and feeling the outer world.
yeah,
If you put your attention on your inner world, it's just as full.
yes.
So yes, and then
So then, so in this age, that's not really possible for us to do, and definitely not at extended periods of time. So we need to engage the
uh-huh.
senses then. So by actively engaging them in a way which is actually beneficial for us spiritually and materially, then that's a good workaround. And so on a reflection on
I
that,
just want to make a quick distinction.
mhm,
The reason why there would be a workaround is Ashtanga, which is very popular kind of yoga these days. Is why there's a workaround in this day and age is because the people who were taking these distinctions much more seriously were monks living in a temple or a monastery, and that they
yeah,
were in a community of practice with elders, and it fit. Their entire
celibacy is
day
a
was about
prerequisite.
this.
Yeah, living in a forest is a prerequisite for Ashtanga
Yeah,
yoga.
you're
It's part of the first two stages. To be celibate, to
uh-huh.
be
Yes, the first
vegetarian,
two.
to live in the forest, away from society. These are prerequisites before you even start with your asanas. This is sama
Yes.
and yama niyama stages,
Asana is your yoga practice.
postures.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
the physical posture. For those of you that don't know.
yeah,
Okay, so but still, even if you were, it was suggested for the first two that you go out into nature. You weren't deciding that from your house. You
yeah.
were deciding that because you were part of a practice. You were part of a monastery or a temple generally.
Hmm. Yeah, and even in the Puranic histories, there's a lot of indications of great kings who
Yes.
that they knew the purpose of life is to realize the self. The purpose of life is not to try and enjoy through your senses. And as a king,
Uh,
they naturally, these kings were known as Rajarshis, which comes from the word Raja Rishi, which means saintly kings. So they weren't just kings, they were
yes.
actually saintly by nature. And these kings, they understood what the real purpose of life is. And but they were also understood that as a king, I can't really devote myself exclusively or even a lot at all to my spiritual life because of my obligations as a king to the people and the kingdom. So as soon as they had an opportunity, they would renounce their kingdom. They would give it to a suitable heir, and then they would leave to the forest immediately. They would go to the
Wow.
forest and they'd start practicing yoga because this is actually what life is about. And they've fulfilled their duties as a king,
Yeah.
and now they can give it over to somebody, and now they can focus on the real meaning of life. So even in those things, even though they didn't join monasteries,
Wow.
they had the knowledge, and they did it by dint of their intelligence and proper understanding of the meaning of life. So, which brings it back to our conversation, is that we need to really rethink what meaning that we put into life. And that life is actually not about all these things that we acquire and the so-called happiness and distress that we experience. It's about realizing the self. And that happiness will come on its own accord in the course of you executing your duties. You don't have to worry about it. And one nice inspiration that I found in the Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the foremost of the Puranas. It's spoken by a 5-year-old boy, and he was a self-realized soul from birth. And he spoke the words. He said, uh, "Sukaya dukkha mokshaya sankalpaya karmina sadapnotiyata dukkha anihaya sukha vritaha," which means that in this world, I like the Sanskrit. It makes me sound cool. No, I'm just joking. It means that in this world we see that that everybody is trying to make their happiness more, and they're trying to make their suffering less, and they're endeavoring according to this plan. But it is a fact, however, that one is happy as long as one does not try to be happy. And as soon as your activities for happiness begins, then your situation of distress arises. So I think that's really powerful.
Yes.
Is to live.
Yes.
It requires you to live in the now. It requires you to accept the present moment for what it is and not try and resist that. And then also to direct one's energies and efforts towards some kind of transcendental purpose. And in the path of devotion, that's the whole point, is that everything you do, you try to do it as an act of devotion. So even when you are busy producing a new child, then you're doing it as an act of devotion by trying to bring in a saintly person into this world that can actually make a difference in this world. So, and
So
increasing the deficit or decreasing the deficit of saintly people. So just an example.
So to redirect you a little bit is, so the context of people sitting at home in isolation for an extended amount of time, what would you suggest is some baby steps in regards to start engaging in these greater understandings? So it's the overview. The overview is perfect as usual. But not everybody is, they need some baby steps to be able to start their journey. And they will, out of experience, out of gaining some experience, they'll be able to have more distinctions that if they enjoyed themselves and it worked for them, then they will then be able to choose more with greater understanding.
Yes.
So what would you say to somebody that's sitting at home and wants to apply any part of this greater understanding, so that they can, move away from their senses and something that is impossible to be happy with, to satisfy, and is a little bit of a distraction away from what you truly are?
Yes. I would say that reflect on how you are existing separately from your mind and your senses, and that they're simply demanding you to do certain things that they want, and that the idea that we will become happy by engaging through them is false. So I think it's very much, you should challenge your own belief system really about where you can derive happiness from, and whether the happiness that you're deriving, whether that's actually what you want. Because I think that's an important point, is that we endeavor a lot to enjoy some kind of happiness, and then there's a price to pay for it also. Are you still with me?
Yes. Well, you did cut out a little bit there.
Okay.
So there is a price, but the part that I wanted to ask you about, the part I wanted to ask you is about when you said is that you just alluded to the self, that you're, that you notice that you're a self that's separate from their senses. Point for people to actually be able to have some kind of sense. It might be the first time that they hear this.
Yes.
So separating, like if I'm not my senses and I'm not my body and I'm not this unit that I think I am, then what's the self? How do I find it? How do I express it? Experience it, experiment with it, and what am I doing and what am I trying to create so that I can have this experience?
Okay, I think I was heading towards that, and I think it's a sense, especially for many people, that's quite a foreign kind of idea about the self and it's being different from the mind and
It
senses.
is.
I think it's a good idea to take a step back first and just consider how there he goes. And he's back.
Joys of having a cat.
Yeah. So that we have to assess whether we are getting what we want. Because for many people, they are content with whatever their life is right now. And for those type of people, talking about connecting to the self is actually not important or even relevant for them, because why should I? I'm content. So
Well, there's
my challenge is to assess whether what you're getting is what you want, because it has a price to pay. And also, is it actually bringing you the bliss that you want? And is it worth that price that you're having to pay for it? So this is an honest
for me,
question you have to ask yourself.
yeah, for me is that I think that people are so engaged in the only way they know how to be is in the pursuit of happiness through their senses, and that they don't have any experience that there's anything else that's available.
Yes.
That they're that I think that the low level anxiety and unfulfillment is so normalized that people are, you ask them how they are, they go, they're fine.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Good point.
I don't think people really realize that if somebody knew there was another way to behave, and if they could look at themselves, you kind of have to observe yourself and go and have a realization that I'm, what am I? Like as soon as like in meditation, you start having, it starts giving a glimmer of an idea that there's a self there, there's an experience of me that's separate to the senses and these senses. And there I can get a sense of that there's something different going on and there might be another way to behave. But until then, these people, they're only, they, this is normal. They're doing the best that they can. It's giving them some level of satisfaction, they think, and they don't have any other options to do anything else. And people talking to them about meditation and self and that there's another way to be, they have no connection to. So
a disclaimer should also be given with this, is that if you do this reflection and you find out, let's say, that your job is very unfulfilling, that does not necessitate that you change your job. Because as you were saying, that's kind of maybe the only thing they know. It doesn't mean you have to change that, because
yes,
the next step after that realization is actually thinking, what in this world do you think you can do that would actually give you that happiness you're not getting now? And then if you come up with an answer, think of a person who has that. And then you ask yourself, is he happy? And then you'll quickly realize that a lot of these things you're thinking about, none of these things will actually bring that happiness. And then you can start asking questions about, but what am I then? What is actually going to make me happy? And that's actually where you get to the next step, where you start inquiring into the self, the real self. I'll give one example that I had practically. I was waiting for a bus stop once when I was a student many years ago in Stellenbosch, and there was one African gentleman who was next to me, and we started talking. And one of the things he said was that he's saving up to buy a house for his family, because if he has a house, then he'll be happy. So I asked him. I said, "You think that a house will make you happy?" He said, "Yes." And I asked him, "And there are so many people who have houses. Are they happy?" And he thought about it, and he just like, his eyes went like wide. He was like, "No, they're not." And I was like, "Exactly. The house will not make you happy, my friend. Only if you connect to God, then that will make you happy, or to creation, or however one kind of approaches it." So that's the idea.
yes.
Is that it's not the actual activity that will make you happy, like the eating or the job or whatever, but it's the consciousness in which you do it, which makes a difference. And if your
Yeah,
consciousness is saturated with love and devotion towards the creation, then that will give you satisfaction. It's that service, not the actual physical activity or even mental activity.
yeah.
It's a consciousness.
Yeah, that's something that if somebody is just new to this, it's words about where you'll be if you do X, Y, and Z that they generally don't have an experience of now. But I agree with you with the part about they did a study with people who had won the lottery,
Ah,
and
that's good.
people who had won, enormous amounts of money, and where they will think that they will be happy from that day on because they're going to have all of their needs taken care of and they don't have to stress or worry about finance, at least, which is most people's largest stress, or are tied for second at least. um, Love and money is the two things people struggle with the most.
Yeah.
And what they noticed is that if somebody was a happy person before they got the money, 6 to 8 months later, they would revert back to whatever their personality was before they got it. If they were an unhappy person, they would become unhappy again, and if they were
Ah,
a happy person, they would be happy again,
ah,
or continually so. But I find that interesting that in regards to your circumstances changing aren't going to make you happy.
yeah.
So looking at something a little bit deeper. So what is, in once again, I will reiterate that if there's somebody that doesn't have any experience or very little experience in the self or in getting satisfaction from their connection to who they are and their connection to from what they are to all that is the way I speak it, is what we teach in meditation. Um, what are is there any kind of stepping stones that you can suggest?
Yeah, I can. I also just say that we are at 30 minutes now, so we got a couple more minutes left. Um, I think that this reflection that I was mentioning a little bit
I think you're gonna
earlier,
have to say that all again because you just harmonicized. Just say
uh,
that again.
I said that we are 30 minutes now and we have a few minutes left. Did you get that? Can you hear me? Is the
Yeah, we're at 30 now.
okay? Good. So I think a very good
Yeah, so let's let's
start
uh
is
let's
to
leave
go
let's
through
leave
that
people.
little reflection that I was talking about earlier about weighing out the happiness that you are getting and the price that you're paying for that, and just being honest with yourself whether that is what you want. And I think that that's an excellent first step, because that doesn't require any knowledge or any experience of soul to be able to go through that. And that if you honestly go through this process, it will spark within yourself such a strong desire to want to know more, which will lead you to be able to understanding the self much easier. Because you have to have the desire also. If it's just like something that interests you, and then it won't be so much of a inspiration for you. You need some inspiration to like pursue that. So I think this is a good way of doing that, to get some impetus to pursuing that knowledge. And then the next stage is obviously asking those questions. And then from your questions, that will guide you from where you should go next. Where you're asking certain questions about what am I? And so I think maybe in another time we can
So
discuss
step one. So step one is looking to see what your true satisfaction is, and that if you're not satisfied, then it starts a journey of exploring where others are saying what the path is to realizing and aligning with self, and where true satisfaction is, and where true self is as opposed to false ego, and what is the relate. That's really probably the what I would say is the journey from that place is what is the true self versus what is the false ego, and being able to go, okay, what is what, and how do these things play out in my life, and how do I explore one, and how do I understand the other. So would you say that's fair?
You're asking those questions of fair?
Yes,
Yeah, I
that
think
that would
those are
be
very good
the.
questions. Those are very good questions to ask. Very important questions, actually.
So we've come to what we're trying to keep this down to a time limit, and so thank you very much, Briat. Sorry, today I'm having phone troubles. I'm having sinus troubles, and we had a little bit of technology troubles because you did harmonikize a few times. So
Yeah.
hopefully that isn't what got recorded, and that's just what I heard on my side. Let's hope.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my friend.
A very enlivening conversations for me, and I hope that that you, the listeners,
Thank you.
also
Hopefully that was
get
useful.
from it.
Say that again.
I'm saying it's a very enlivening conversation for me, and I'm hoping that the listeners that they will also get some inspiration from these discussions. And even if it inspires you a little bit, I'll consider it to be a success.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Until tomorrow.
Till
Thank you, my
tomorrow.
friend.
Haribol.
Love and light.